My mom burned my 2.5 lottery ticket. What I did after left her speechless. They said she was ungrateful, that she won $2.5 million, then disappeared. Didn't give her mom a dime, didn't help her sister who was on the brink of bankruptcy. But what no one knew was this: the lottery ticket was never cashed. Her own mother burned it in the kitchen sink, all because Nora refused to split it evenly with the family. Most thought that was the end of the story. But then, Nora came back. Silently, gracefully, with a mission. She founded a charity worth over $1 million, dedicated to people who were betrayed by their own families. Why would someone choose to forgive after being torn apart by those who gave her life? And what made the very mother the woman who set fire to her daughter's future tremble as she held a newspaper and whisper, "Is that you?" If the people you loved most destroyed your dream, could you forgive them without losing yourself? And if one day, the same person who burned your tomorrow came back just to ask for a glass of water, would you fill the glass or walk away while they thirsted? Nora Bellamy wasn't the kind of woman who believed in luck. She lived in a weathered wooden cabin on the edge of Pine Hollow, a town where winter came early, and people were more familiar with enduring than hoping. At 36, Nora worked as a supply clerk at the public library. She sorted overdue books, replaced burnt-out light bulbs, and scribbled pencil notes on a maintenance calendar no one ever read. That night, after a long shift, and yet another tired argument with her mother, June Bellamy about slamming the fridge door too hard, Nora stopped by the gas station on the corner. She bought a cheap box of tea, a melted chocolate bar, and almost without thinking, a single lottery ticket. Not because she believed she'd win, but because it was one of the few choices in her life that belonged to her alone. A week later, before the sun had fully risen, Nora stood at the kitchen sink, making coffee with an old kettle. The radio crackled with the previous night's lottery numbers. The moment the sequence was read, something in her stilled. She checked the ticket, then checked it again. A third time. Her heart didn't race. She didn't scream. She just tightened her grip on the coffee mug, both hands, and stared at the crumpled slip of paper. $2.5 million. And no one knew. No one but her. The rain had just begun when Nora stepped into the house. The sound of droplets hitting the tin roof echoed like a warning. Tonight there was no turning back. Her mother, June, sat in the living room, a half-finished wool scarf resting in her lap. The soft yellow lamp cast shadows over a face etched with years. The TV was on, but no one was listening. Nora stood there for a moment, then spoke gently. "Mom, I won the lottery." June looked up, didn't blink. "What?" "I won the jackpot. $2.5 million. Silence. A knitting needle slipped from her hand and clinked against the floor. The rain outside suddenly sounded louder than breathing. Finally, June spoke, slow, deliberate. "You can't keep that money for yourself." Nora sat down, her voice calm, almost quiet. "Why not?" June met her daughter's eyes, unflinching. "Your sister Erin is drowning in debt. She almost lost her house on those ridiculous investments. And you're doing fine." "Fine," Nora repeated, a dry laugh escaping. "I drive a car older than I am. I split the electric bill with you every month. I don't owe anyone, and this money is mine." June didn't argue. She rose, walked to the window, and gently drew the curtain aside. The streetlight outside washed her cheek in a pale glow, turning her features to stone. "Then you've made your choice," she said, voice even cold. "What choice?" "To live your life without a family." Nora didn't respond. The rain fell harder. The next morning, Nora woke earlier than usual. The sky was still gray. A soft mist clung to the kitchen window. She reached for the kettle to make coffee just like every other morning. But as soon as she turned on the faucet, a strange smell hit her. Ash. Burnt paper. She looked down at the sink. Amid the leftover bubbles from last night's dishwashing, streaks of gray-black clung to the metal basin. Tiny flakes of ash stuck to the edges. And there, half-soaked, half-charred, was a small piece of paper. The words Idaho Lottery still visible barely. She froze. Her hand slipped from the faucet. The water kept running. June stood nearby. She didn't flinch, didn't hide. She wore a thin housecoat, and in her hand was a metal tong, still blackened with ash. She said nothing until Nora turned and looked at her. Really looked. "You burned it," Nora asked, her voice flat. "Empty." June didn't nod, didn't shake her head. She only whispered, "I couldn't let you be that selfish." Nora laughed, but it wasn't joy. It was the sound of something breaking. That money was mine. The first small thing I ever got to choose for myself. June quietly set the tong down. "I read your journal." Nora stiffened. "You... what?" "In your nightstand drawer. I saw what you wrote. Your plans to leave. To leave me after you cashed the ticket." June's voice shook. She wouldn't meet her daughter's eyes. "You were going to abandon me. Just like your father did." Nora stood still, heart clenching. "So you burned my future because you felt alone." June looked up. "I didn't want your money. But I couldn't bear knowing you only stayed because you were poor." In that small kitchen, the ashes still hadn't cooled, and the two women stood just a few feet apart, yet felt worlds away. The call came on a Monday morning, while Nora was shelving books in the library's basement storage. Her phone buzzed nonstop inside her coat pocket. When she pulled it out, the caller ID read, "Nora Bellamy." She hesitated, then answered. "You really won the lottery." Aaron's voice cut in without a greeting, sharp as a razor. Nora said nothing. "Don't pretend. Mom told me. She's disappointed too. You kept it from the family, hoarding the money like I'm some stranger." Nora leaned back against a dusty bookshelf, her eyes fixed on the flickering ceiling light. "What exactly do you know? I know you've got the money, and I'm about to lose my house, thanks to that stupid investment. If there's any part of you that still considers me family. Family doesn't burn each other's lottery tickets." Nora's tone didn't waver. Calm. Even. There was a pause on the other end. "What, nothing?" Nora hung up. 3 days later, when Nora walked into the town's coffee shop, every eye turned. Some whispered. Others didn't bother hiding their curiosity. She caught fragments just enough to sting. She's hiding the money. Heard her mom begged she still wouldn't share. Her sister's about to go bankrupt. No one knew the ticket was already ash. No one asked for the truth. And Nora didn't offer it. She simply picked up her cup of tea, walked out into the cool morning air, and felt the world around her echo like it was coming from somewhere far away. That evening, just before closing time, Nora walked into the bank. She no longer had the ticket, but she had something else. A copy of the gas station receipt with her signature, and a security camera clip emailed by a kind clerk showing her buying the winning ticket. She laid the documents on the counter, met the banker's eyes. Steady, unafraid. "It's time I took care of myself now." And for the first time in her life, her voice wasn't drowned out by anyone in her family. The Windmere Hotel had seen better days. Its wallpaper was faded with floral patterns from decades past, and the hallway carpet was worn thin, marked by footsteps that time never erased. Nora stopped in front of room 204. Her palms were damp with sweat. She raised her hand and knocked. The door opened. The man inside wore a gray knit cap, wire-rimmed glasses, and a wrinkled wool coat. He looked like a retired civil clerk, forgettable ordinary. But when he looked up, Nora recognized him instantly. "Alden," she whispered. He smiled. "I figured you wouldn't recognize me." 3 winters ago, Nora had let a homeless man spend the night in the library's supply shed. She'd handed him a worn blanket, a mug of hot cocoa, and never asked too many questions. That man, the one with the quiet, weary eyes, was now Alden Ross Identity Verification Officer for the Idaho State Lottery Commission. He gestured to the small table where a laptop sat open, playing a grainy security camera clip. Nora buying the winning ticket. There's no doubt, he said. You bought the jackpot ticket. You're entitled to claim the full prize. He paused. But I have to ask, do you want the money back or the trust of your family? Nora sat down, gripping the strap of her bag tightly. Their trust was never mine to begin with. Alden nodded slowly. No judgment, no pity, just quiet understanding. He slid a folder toward her. They won't release your identity publicly unless you allow it. But from now on, you have back everything that was taken from you. Nora signed. Her hand didn't tremble. Her face didn't flinch. She walked out of room 204 lighter than when she came in. Not because she was rich now, but because for the first time everything she had was truly hers. No permission needed, no more enduring. The money didn't come in a golden envelope. There was no oversized check arriving in the rusted mailbox at the end of Maple Street like people imagined. 1 month after the meeting at the Windmere Hotel, Nora received a text from the bank. Account credited $2,500,000. No one else knew the account existed, opened under a proxy name with every personal detail encrypted beyond recognition. The next morning, Nora went to work, like always. She walked through the same rusted iron gate of the public library, drank coffee from a chipped plastic mug, wore the same old coat, the one with a tear in the left shoulder. People in town whispered, maybe she never really won. Others scoffed. If she did win and still lives like that, she's probably lost her mind. But Nora didn't bother explaining. In a small rented room behind the old tailor's shop, she placed a laptop on the table and opened a spreadsheet she'd built weeks before. The first line read, "The Sparrow Fund for the Quietly Abandoned." She'd chosen the name after too many sleepless nights. The Sparrow, small plane unnoticed, but it survives even the coldest winters. Nora began wiring grants, hundreds, sometimes thousands of dollars to local community groups. Every dollar went to one kind of person, adults who'd been rejected by their families, for their identity, for breaking the mold, or simply for not being good enough to keep. No one knew who the founder was. The website had only one line printed beneath its simple banner. We don't ask what happened. We ask what you still dream of. Nora didn't need to be known. She just needed to know that this time she wasn't silent. And with the very money that had once been turned to ash, she rekindled light for those the world had forgotten. Just like her. The letter came on a Saturday morning, tucked between discount flyers and the electric bill. No return address, just one word on the envelope in an old, familiar hand. Nora. She opened it right there on the porch as the morning fog still hugged the ground. The scent of old paper and fading ink rose softly, like a memory with doubts still clinging to it. You can hate me. You have every right. But if one day I fall, where will my daughter go? Who will walk her to school? Who will teach her the difference between truth lies and pity? I'm not writing to ask for money. I'm writing because, for the first time, I'm no longer the center of anyone's story. And that scares me. Aaron Nora read to the end, then folded the letter slowly. No tears. Only something shifting in her chest like an old crack caught a breeze. 3 days later, her mother June was diagnosed with early-stage dementia. She began forgetting how to make tea, forgetting the neighbors' names, sometimes even forgetting whether Nora was born in October or December. When Aaron brought June to Nora's doorstep, no one said much. June sat on the wooden porch chair, eyes lost in the distant pine trees. Aaron stood beside her, holding a thin scarf, eyes red. "I know you don't owe me anything," Aaron said, voice trembling. "But if Mom ever gets lost, you're the only face she might still remember." Nora didn't respond. She opened the door and stepped aside. That night, the kitchen glowed with warm yellow light. On the table, tomato soup, toasted bread, chamomile tea. Simple. June ate quietly, hands trembling now and then. Erin stared into her water glass, unable to lift her gaze. After dinner, Nora placed 2 small envelopes on the table, each one labeled in her handwriting. "One for each of you," she said. Not because I was guilted into it, but because I've learned to forgive without waiting for an apology. Erin looked up, lips quivering. "Thank you," she whispered. And June said just one word. Soft. Barely more than a breath. "Sorry." For the first time in her life, Nora heard those 2 words from the woman who had once set her dreams on fire. And instead of anger, she quietly cleared the table. As if finally life had decided to leave her in peace. The wind had begun to shift when Nora pulled 2 envelopes from the wooden drawer. Outside, pine needles drifted across the porch like quiet reminders of passing time. Inside the kitchen still held the warmth of dinner, tomato soup, chamomile tea, and the silence of 3 women who once couldn't share a table. Nora placed the 2 envelopes on the old wooden table between the now cleared plates and cups. She didn't say gift. She didn't say give. She simply pushed each envelope forward, one to Erin, one to June. "One for each of you," she set her gaze steady. "Not because I was forced, but because I want to end the war." The kitchen fell quiet, like someone had just exhaled, but no one claimed it. Erin picked up hers. Her hands trembled as if the paper might catch fire if held too long. She opened it. Inside a neat stack of bills, $15 and a small note. "I'm not sharing this because I was pressured. I'm sharing it because I want to end the hatred." Erin said nothing. She stared at her hands for a long time. Her eyes held no resentment now. No pride, either. Just a small space that had been quietly filled. June opened hers more slowly. She didn't count the money. She simply read the handwritten line and whispered voice shaking softer than Nora had ever heard. "I don't deserve this. But thank you for not making me beg." Nora didn't reply. She didn't have to. She simply poured more tea into her mother's cup with both hands. A simple gesture, but one that hadn't happened in over 10 years. 3 weeks later, Erin appeared on a local radio program. Her voice was lower than usual. Not sharp, not confident, but real. "I used to think helping people was how you earned praise," Erin said into the mic. "Now I know helping people means doing it, knowing they may never pay you back and still doing it anyway." She spoke about the Open Hands Project, a small financial aid program for single mothers rejected by their own families. Every month they'd receive basic support. No explanations required, no moral tests, no strings attached. Just one question: when was the last time you were called? Family. Erin never mentioned Nora. She didn't need to. Those who knew, and those who didn't need to. In Pine Hollow, people said Erin had changed. Nora didn't care about the whispers. She just glanced at the Sparrow Fund's ledger, then quietly transferred $5,000 to the Open Hands Project. No name. No note. Because for the first time, 2 women who once stood on opposite sides had learned how to step back, so no one had to walk alone through winter ever again. The article was tucked into a tiny news section at the bottom of page 5 in the Pine Hollow Chronicle, right beneath ads for roof repairs and second-hand stoves. The headline was, "Nothing Special." Anonymous lottery winner in Idaho launches $1 million charity fund. No photo, no name. Just a few quiet lines about a large sum of money, discreetly distributed through multiple support initiatives, scholarships for adults estranged from their families, temporary housing for single mothers, emergency groceries, for those escaping toxic relationships. That morning, the paper sat quietly on the kitchen table beside June Bellamy's pill bottle. She didn't read much anymore, eyes failing memory, fading, but somehow, that day, she turned to exactly that page, as if an invisible hand had gently guided her. June lifted the newspaper, eyes, squinting hands, trembling but firm. She read to the very last line, then looked up at Nora, who stood at the sink, peeling apples slowly, sunlight spilling through the window and catching the frayed ends of her hair. "Was it you?" June asked. Her voice raspy, barely above a breath, as if she feared she'd forget the question before hearing the answer. Nora didn't turn around. She brushed the peelings aside, poured a glass of water, and placed it gently in front of her mother. "Did you take your pills?" June looked at her daughter, eyes clouded but still holding the last light of day. She didn't ask again, just nodded, softly, as if the silence was all the confirmation she needed. No need for Nora to say yes, no confessions, no explanations. Just the way she poured the water, just the way she sat beside her, just the way. June looked at the paper, then folded it closed and held on to it. In the eyes of a mother who once set fire to a dream, her daughter, without name, without praise, was now quietly rebuilding a world. A world no one knew she made, but someone somewhere could still feel they belonged in. The cabin sat on the northern edge of Pine Hollow, pressed against the line of pine forest, where winter came early and darkness often arrived before dusk. When Nora was a child, every time she misbehaved, she was sent there, a cold wooden room with a tiny window and the damp, musty scent of being left behind. 30 years later, she returned. The cabin had rotted, the roof sagged, the door barely held on its hinges. But Nora didn't tear it down. She rebuilt it bit by bit using the very money that had once nearly been turned to ash. She transformed the place that once made her feel small and forgotten into a shelter for those the world no longer had room for. When it was done, she gave it a simple name, Hollow Light. Inside were neatly stacked bunk beds, a wood-burning stove, shelves filled with secondhand books, and a long dining table where everyone had a place to sit. Every mother who arrived was given 3 months, minimum no forms, no screenings, just one question. Do you have anyone to call when you need help? Late at night, after everyone had gone to sleep, Nora would sit by the window, writing the final lines in her worn brown leather journal. I was taught that sharing is love, but I had to relearn sometimes not sharing is how you save yourself. And just below that in darker ink, I forgive not to give them peace, but to give myself a life I can stand in. The wind moved through the pines, soft as a whisper of permission. And Nora finally wasn't just surviving for someone else's comfort. She was living, truly, fully, her own.